Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 3, and I'm just going to cover the basics and give you a summary. And we'll be discussing issues in ESP course design. By issues, we mean what do we need to consider when we are designing our course. Okay, here are some things that we need to consider. First of all, we need to consider language varieties, a needs analysis, a syllabus, and a wide versus narrow-angled course design. So let's examine these one by one. Okay, the first thing is variety. So this is kind of a terminology that we use in TESOL. Variety means the type of language. And for ESP, that would mean English in banking, English in medicine, English in academic settings. So those are some examples that the book provides. Okay, and so when we talk about what language we need to teach, there are two perspectives, two sides. Okay, one opinion is that there's a common core of general language, and the other side is there is no common core of general language. Okay, what do we mean by that? Let's look at that. Okay, Common Core Plus. So we looked a little bit about that in the book, and this argues that most language overlaps. So basic everyday language and technical or academic English mostly overlap. So they would argue that we need to teach learners basic English before technical English or academic English. Okay, so you're going to start, step by step. So first you're going to teach them just maybe common classroom language, like for example, we talked about last week, like, may I go to the restroom, or may I get a drink of water? So they would have to learn that before they start talking about academic English, or English for certain subjects or workplaces. Okay, now the other perspective is all language is specific purpose. So basically, this side argues that learners can pick up basic English in the classroom or work setting naturally. So we don't need to teach them basic English before academic or specific English. So the argument is that they would just pick up the language naturally. So just by, if they learn the more advanced language first, it's not really a big deal, because they would pick up, the language that they need for basic functions like going to the bathroom or going to buy groceries or, taking the subway. They would just learn that all naturally. So we don't need to teach them that side. And remember, this is just an opinion. So this is one, perspective. So if you feel like you disagree with that, that's totally fine. But this perspective says that we can start teaching ESP at any level, even beginners. So even beginning speaking English students you could throw them into the ESP classroom and not pre-teach them any of that basic language. We call that sometimes survival language. They don't really need to learn that. Let's teach them the academic English or the English for specific purposes first. And I think this is going to lead us to our assignment this week. So did you agree with this, or did you disagree with this? So think about how you would, if you were in this situation, would you teach your students, the basic survival English first, or would you just teach them the subject English, the English for specific purposes, the science English, the math English, etc.? What would you do in your situation? Okay, another thing that's very common when people are designing a course is a needs analysis. So I'm sure you've heard this before in your other classes. So a needs analysis is the process of identifying the learner's language needs before designing a course. So for example, you might ask the students what is a specific area that they would like to focus on. I usually do this with my classes as well. So I usually ask the students, what are some activities, or what are some skills that you want to work on more? Would it be speaking, listening, etc.? Okay, so what kind of activities do your students need? What kind of what skills are they looking to get from the course? And sometimes I even, more of a motivational thing, like what do you want to do? So some students might want to listen to music once in a while. So, I ask them those things as well. And you can get more detailed, obviously, with the needs analysis. And also, if you have children, if you're teaching children, you could make the needs analysis more simple. If they can't read, you could, show them pictures, and then they can just have a smiley face or a sad face, which they have to circle. So that could be like a really simple needs analysis for children if they can't read yet. And the data is usually collected by questionnaires or interviews. And the book goes into a little bit like some of the data might come from the institution itself. So that's another possibility. And if you're working with parents, it might come from the parents. That could be another possibility as well. And the data usually determines the content of the course, including the syllabus, the materials, and also the methodology. So if we want to make our course more learner-centered, we might use a needs analysis when we're designing a course. Okay, so there's some good points about the needs analysis. It can be motivating for learners when they can see the importance of what they're studying. So if they said, I want to learn grammar, and then you teach them some grammar, I guess they would be quite happy with that because that's, specifically what they asked for. It could help with time constraints. If you only have, 1 hour a week with your students or 2 hours a week, you can focus on the bits of English that they need. So kind of a triage situation. So you help them with the most important things first. And not focus really on the things that they don't want to learn or the things that they don't need. So it's useful when you're designing a course to identify the needs of the learners. So the book had sort of a negative viewpoint about the needs analysis. They had a lot of things that could be problematic. And some of the cons are sometimes the information comes from institutions themselves. And if we think about some institutions, they might be working for profit, so they might not be looking out for the best interests of the learners. So you have to be careful with that at times. If you've ever had experience working in institutions like Hagwons or other for-profit organizations, there does seem to be a disconnect between what learners might actually need and what the institution wants you to teach. So sometimes they don't always have an educational background, so they don't really know what learners need. Another issue, which was kind of interesting to me, so it could force immigrants into low-wage jobs or marginal occupations if they do not have good enough English to move out of these jobs. So if we're talking about ESP and we're thinking about jobs like I don't know, like, a maid or something like that, and you have to learn the vocabulary to communicate about that, then they might be kind of stuck in that situation. They have no opportunity to move up because they don't have the language for that. And sometimes learners do not really understand what they need or how to express their needs. So if you ask them like a difficult grammar point, then they don't know how to describe that. They don't have, we call that meta language, so they don't have that meta language to describe, if I want to say, oh, second conditional, they have no idea what second conditional is, right? So they don't know that how to describe maybe what they want to learn. So they don't have the meta language or the background to talk about what they need to learn. And then finally, another point that there was a lot that kind of overlapped, so I just wanted to focus on these ones. One of the other points was that using technical texts can sometimes be demotivating. Maybe students don't always want to learn about technical language. So maybe at times, doing something, that's maybe not as academic, but something that can motivate them more might be useful. For example, I think we talked about pop songs, or, having something fun to do once in a while, not just always doing technical things. So sometimes students might want something, a game, especially for children, right? So once in a while, maybe you're going to do something fun with them. So you're not just every day going to talk about science or math. After a while, it could be demotivating for students, especially children. Okay, and the book says the next thing that we need to think about when we're designing a course is the types of syllabus we're going to use. So the first syllabus is just kind of a general syllabus for any kind of course that you're teaching. It doesn't have to be a ESP course. So the syllabus would contain a comprehensive list of maybe some items like words, structures, topics, and also how you're going to carry out these through what task, what method. And it's usually ordered. So if most syllabuses that I've seen, it starts out easier, right? And then it would get harder after time. And it has explicit objectives. So we're going to be very clear about what we want the students to do after the course. What do you hope the students can do after the course? It's a public document, which just means, your school, your students, parents, they should all be able to see it, right? And it may indicate a time schedule, so there could be a schedule of what you're going to do, what date, etc. And it might also include a preferred methodology or approach, and you might also have supplement materials. Okay, and then there's some other descriptions of a syllabus. So it can be synthetic. Language is segmented into discrete linguistic items for presentation one at a time. And I feel like I see this a lot more in Korean institutions, right? They would break it down by grammar point. Or it could be analytical. So language is presented whole chunks at a time without linguistic control. So language would be approached holistically at first and then broken down later. So I think that, in my opinion, that you probably see that more for advanced students, because it would be difficult for them to, I feel like it would be difficult for them to start with a big chunk of language without knowing, what it means. But some people might argue with me about that. Okay, and then this next slide, this is going to lead us into, again, the assignment, what we talked about last time. Everyone was asking me what is hard or soft language functions. So hard, just just the basics to carry out our work or academic functions. So we're just using the language to communicate for our jobs or for our school. We're not doing anything else. We're not, making friends, nothing like that. Okay, soft things like humor, for example, expressing condolences. If somebody dies in your office, a coworker's family member dies, how are you going to console that person in English? Or showing sympathy if somebody's upset or having a bad day, how can you show them, how do you express sympathy to that person? So things like just, things that we need to socialize in daily life. So do we need to have just the basics, or do we need to teach students how to get along with people? Because if you don't have the language for that, it could be difficult, because I think a lot of, academic or work-related situations, there is a social component there. So I feel like we need to teach them some language to how to get along with people, how to express different things in social situations. Okay, and here's some more types of syllabuses. So we've kind of broken them down into different types of syllabuses. So here are some you might see. Structural, that would contain grammar, sentence patterns. Another one could be functional, communicative functions. So functions are usually like specific aims of communication, like you're trying to carry something out. Okay, and notions are more real life situations in which people communicate. Okay, so for example, if you think about a notion, let's see, so if we were talking about, how about a student trying to get attention from a teacher? So that would be the function. They're trying to get attention from the teacher. And so basically, the notion would be student to teacher, and the function would be getting attention, and then they would have some kind of expression. For example, like, excuse me, teacher, or teacher, can you help me? Okay, so the notion would be student to teacher. The function would be getting attention, and you would teach them some expression like, excuse me. Okay, and then there's like topical, so talking about topics. Like, you see that a lot I've seen that a lot in daycare centers. For example, they would do, okay, it's spring, so we're going to talk about springtime, and we're going to talk about all the different flowers in springtime. So that would be a topical type of syllabus. Okay, and next is situational. Okay, situational might be, for example, we talked about going to the doctor, or going to the drugstore, or mailing a package. So usually you see that in communities like immigrant communities. There'll be a class divided up into different situations, like how to go to the doctor in English, how to go to the post office in English, how to buy a train ticket in English, etc. Okay, so skills like micro skills. So think about the 4 skills. Those are macro skills, reading, writing, etc. So micro skills would be breaking that even further down. So it would be teaching things like So if you're teaching the macro skill of speaking, you could teach them some pronunciation for a micro skill. For example, how to pronounce certain vowels, or how to pronounce different stress patterns in English. So that could be a micro skill. If you're teaching them reading as a macro skill, you would teach them like vocabulary as a micro skill. Or maybe I think a better example could be like if you're teaching them reading, maybe reading for gist, so reading to get a general idea. Okay, and last is a task or activity-based syllabus. So we're going to organize this around different activities, and this is task-based learning. And we talked a lot about that last week, so I think everybody had a pretty good understanding. So you're just going to have them do the task. And there's different ways you can design this, so you don't always have to do like the task first. You could pre-teach them some language and then have them do the task. So for example, like I think we talked about this a lot last time, but some different ones could be doing a job interview, or visiting a doctor, visiting a pharmacy, etc., and then teaching them how to perform that task in English. Okay, and this is what the book has for a syllabus for English for EAP. So we could do things like lexico-grammatical, so organized around structures and vocabulary, functional notional, so organized around language functions. Remember that means like what we use the language to do. If I want to get the teacher's attention, I would say, "Excuse me, teacher." Discourse-based, so organized around aspects of text cohesion and coherence. So that would be where you would examine a text, and you would examine it for cohesion and coherence, and trying to teach the students to recognize those patterns. Okay, we have learning centered, so organized around what learners have to do in order to learn language items and skills, so not the items and skills themselves. So you might take a topic and have a student, lead the class or carry out a seminar. So they're going to be generating a lot of the material for the lesson. Skills-based, so just, the 4 skills. Genre-based, we talked a lot about genres, so I'm sure you have a good understanding of that. So genre-based is like teaching your students how to kind of emulate a certain style. And content-based, organized around themes. We talked about that a little bit for daycares, like could be, let's talk about science, etc. So that could be like a content-based course. And then again, task-based, so carrying out, performing tasks. Okay, and finally we're going to talk about narrow and wide angle course design. And this just leaves us with the question of how specific do we want to get. So you have to think about, your resources, and just think realistically of how specific with your content do you want to get. And I think this is where a lot of for example, in my job right now, I think we're kind of working towards this more of a wide angle course design, because right now I teach all majors, so I teach engineers, or I teach English literature students, and I'm going to teach them basic academic skills that they need. So that's kind of the direction of our course right now that we're working on. So we're trying to teach them how to use citations when they're writing, or how to write a 5-paragraph essay, or how to make a bibliography. So we're looking at more of a wide angle course. Now a narrow angle course, now that would probably get really specific into vocabulary for that major or for that job. So I think if you're dealing with a large group of people and they all, have varying majors, or their job is a little bit, overlapping, maybe we could use a wide angle course. But I think if you're teaching like a specific group of people, maybe you would want to use more of a narrow angle course. So I think for the rest of this chapter, why don't you have a look through page 27 for some of the academic skills needed to teach a wide angle course. I think they're pretty, I don't want to cover them too much because they're pretty self-explanatory. So for example, we have things like skimming reading for gist. So being able to, read an article and be able to look at the gist. So gist means just like the main idea. So not reading and getting bogged down by specific vocabulary items, just getting the big picture of an article or a book. Scanning when you're reading, distinguishing more from less important information, and so on. So I think you guys can probably skim through that and pick up some ideas. So I think that's all I want to talk about today. So let's talk again on Zoom on Monday. So we'll have a chat about that. And then if you can try to answer the questions at the end of the chapter, pick one that you want to talk about in detail. It's okay if you have the same question as another person, because you might have a different perspective or opinion, so it's totally fine. And remember, a lot of these are opinion questions, so don't be afraid that you have a wrong answer or anything like that, because a lot of these, they're very based on our context. So we all have a different teaching context, so something that works for me, it might not work for you, it might not work for another teacher. So please don't feel like you have the right or wrong answer. So you're, as long as you're thinking and doing the work, you're doing good. Okay, so that's all I want to say for today. So I will see you soon and have a good weekend.